In the summer of 1941, when Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa, millions of men poured across the Soviet border. Among them was a unique formation, the 5th SS Panzer Division, Wiking. Unlike most units of the Waffen-SS, this division was not composed solely of Germans. Its ranks were filled with volunteers from across Europe, Norwegians, Danes, Dutch, Flemish, even a contingent of Finns. These men had been drawn together by ideology, propaganda, and in many cases, the promise of adventure. For them, the Eastern Front was a crusade against Bolshevism, and they believed they were part of something greater than themselves. But belief alone would not keep them alive in the brutal cauldron of the East. At its core, Wiking was equipped and trained like other SS armored divisions, boasting motorized infantry, artillery, and eventually tanks. But unlike their counterparts who fought in Western Europe, Viking's journey was to the endless plains, forests, and frozen wastes of the Soviet Union. From the beginning, survival was a question mark. Every step eastward carried the division deeper into a war of annihilation, one that would demand everything: endurance, brutality, and a willingness to fight against overwhelming odds. In those first months, the division advanced rapidly alongside the German Army Group South, cutting deep into Ukraine. Soldiers in Viking spoke of victories, of long columns of Soviet prisoners, of the belief that the war might soon be won. But already, cracks were forming. Supply lines stretched too thin. The heat of summer gave way to the mud of autumn, and soon to the Russian winter that would become legendary for its cruelty. Young recruits who had imagined glory instead found themselves hungry, lice-ridden, and exposed to a level of suffering they had never imagined. For the men of Viking, combat was not just about facing the Red Army's tanks and rifles. It was about enduring the vast, merciless landscape where starvation, frostbite, and exhaustion claimed almost as many lives as bullets and shells. From Ukraine to the Caucasus, from the banks of the Dnieper to the frozen steppes, Viking would march and fight for years. And like every German unit on the Eastern Front, its survival rate dwindled with every passing season. In 1942, Viking was sent into the Caucasus as part of Hitler's grand plan to capture Soviet oil. This campaign took the division deeper into enemy territory than ever before, into rugged mountains and endless steppes. For many, this was the harshest test yet. Supply lines again stretched thin, leaving soldiers hungry and undersupplied. Mountain warfare demanded incredible stamina. Men hauling equipment through passes, sleeping in caves or under open skies. When Soviet counterattacks came, retreat was often the only option. Viking fought bitter rearguard actions, sacrificing men to buy time for others to escape. As the Wehrmacht collapsed at Stalingrad in early 1943, Viking narrowly avoided destruction. Pulled back from the Caucasus, the division retreated west, fighting constantly under Soviet pressure. Every mile of retreat was paid for in blood. Soldiers spoke of endless marches through snow and mud, constant hunger, and the ever-present sound of Soviet artillery. Units that began with thousands of men were reduced to a few hundred survivors. Disease, typhus, dysentery, and pneumonia claimed almost as many lives as combat. In the summer of 1943, Viking participated in the Battle of Kursk, the largest tank battle in history. Here, survival odds grew even slimmer. Soviet defenses were prepared in depth, minefields, anti-tank guns, and dug-in infantry. The division's tanks advanced into a storm of fire, and losses were staggering. Soldiers described the battlefield as a graveyard of steel where burning vehicles lit the sky, and the screams of the wounded echoed across the steppe. Those who survived Kursk faced not triumph, but retreat, the beginning of a long, grueling withdrawal that would never end. From 1944 onward, the story of the Viking Division was one of survival against impossible odds. The Red Army's momentum was unstoppable. Viking fought desperate defensive battles in Ukraine, Poland, and Hungary, often surrounded or cut off. forced to break out through sheer violence. Casualties mounted, replacements grew younger and less trained, and morale crumbled. Letters from the front speak of despair, men who no longer believed they would ever see home again. By 1945, what remained of Viking was a shadow of its former self, thrown into hopeless battles as the Soviet tide swept into Germany itself. By the final months of the war, the 5th SS Viking Division was a shattered remnant of what it had once been. From its peak strength of nearly 20,000 men, only a fraction remained. They had fought across Ukraine, the Caucasus, Poland, and Hungary, and now, in 1945, they were pushed back into Austria and Czechoslovakia, clinging to survival as the Third Reich collapsed around them. For the surviving soldiers, surrender was inevitable. Many were captured by the Red Army, and for them, the war did not end. Soviet prison camps meant years of forced labor, starvation, and disease. Only a small number of those taken east would ever return home, some not until the 1950s. For those who survived, the legacy of Viking was complicated. To their comrades, they were remembered as hardened fighters, men who had endured the worst conditions imaginable and fought with determination to the bitter end. But history remembers more. As part of the Waffen-SS, the division was tied to the machinery of a criminal regime, and its legacy cannot be separated from the ideology it served. What is certain, however, is that the men of Viking, like millions of others on the Eastern Front, became part of one of the bloodiest struggles in human history. For most, survival was never guaranteed. For many, it was impossible. In the end, the story of the 5th SS Viking Division is not one of victory, but of survival against impossible odds, of lives consumed by a war that left little behind but ruins, graves, and memories of a campaign that swallowed nearly all who took part.